I know it's hard to believe, football fans, but we are already two-thirds through the NFL regular season. And of course, with another week passing, you know what that means. We have some football to review. So let's get right into it. It's time for the Sports Ball Network's NFL Week 12 breakdown. As is Thanksgiving tradition since 2016, the Detroit Lions kicked things off last Thursday with a loss. This one was a bit surprising as the Lions fell to the Green Bay Packers 29-22. Let's talk about Detroit first. Jared Goff had three fumbles, and though he also had 332 yards and two touchdowns in the air, he looked not very good. Dynamic rookie running back Jahmyr Gibbs only ran for 54 yards on 11 carries. And the defense for Detroit was not able to generate anything. Not a sack, not an interception, not a fumble, anything. That, of course, greatly contributed to the loss. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a Detroit Lions team that has a prolific offense that was unable to get anything going against a suspect Green Bay defense. Now, ultimately, this result doesn't really matter that much for the Detroit Lions in terms of the division. They're still 2 games ahead of the Minnesota Vikings, and they are very likely to win the NFC North. But in terms of the number one seed, they are now 2 games back from Philadelphia, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to see how they can end up with the top seed and the bye. For Green Bay, Jordan Love continued an impressive stretch of play this week. He threw for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's been looking a lot better after what was, hopefully for him, a midseason slump. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Packers do here at quarterback after the season. I would imagine they might do something like the Giants did with Daniel Jones, give him a multi-year contract with an out about halfway through. But who knows? Definitely going to be intriguing. Christian Watson finally had a really good performance this year. He had 5 receptions for 94 yards and a touchdown. Rookie receiver Jaden Reed continues to impress. He had 34 yards and a touchdown as well. And the defense had 3 sacks, 3 fumbles, and was able to stymie an elite Detroit Lions offense. Now, Green Bay is at 5-6, and technically they are a game back from the wild card uh, given the results of the rest of the games. Technically, they can still make a playoff push here. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to, but it's going to be interesting to watch them down the stretch and see what they're able to do. The Dallas Cowboys took care of business like we predicted them to do on the channel last week. They ended up blowing out the Washington Commanders 45-10, moving to 8-3 on the season. Dak Prescott was amazing, 331 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. If you watched him throughout the game, you would see he's playing at an elite level. Tony Pollard, 79 yards and touchdown on the ground, 6 receptions, 24 yards. He was great. CD Lamb was a bit off in this game. 4 receptions for 53 yards and touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion. Normally, you would have expected him to put up bigger numbers, but this week it wasn't really needed. Dallas just manhandled a Washington team that was worse than that, like we expected them to do. Defense continued to dominate, an interception, 4 sacks, and a touchdown. Just a great performance by a Cowboys team that is going to make the playoffs. As for Washington, it was a bit surprising to see them struggle to put up points on the offensive side of the ball. Usually that was not the issue for them for most of the season. And it's not like quarterback Sam Howell had a bad game either. 300 yards and an interception, but he also had 13 yards and touchdown on the ground. He continues to play relatively well, and I think he projects to be this team's quarterback for the future, at least in the short term. Brian Robinson was only able to get 53 yards on the ground. Curtis Samuel, though, 100 yards receiving on 9 receptions. Jahan Dotson, 52 on 5 receptions. Terry McLaurin, unfortunately, though, did struggle. 4 receptions on 11 targets. He did get 50 yards, though. This Washington team at this point looks to be a really, really bad team. They might be the worst team in their division. And this is a division with the New York Giants in. So that really tells you all you need to know about that. I expect coaching changes at the end of the season. Firing Jack Del Rio at defensive coordinator was really just the beginning. I expect Ron Rivera to go. Eric Bieniemy might end up leaving as well, though I doubt that. Washington's new owners after this year are finally going to be able to put their fingerprints on this team. It's going to be very interesting to see where they are in 2024. But as for 2023, I think we can safely say their season is pretty much done. San Francisco 49ers finished up the Thanksgiving slate of games with a 31-13 win over division rival Seattle. The Niners moved to 8-3. They are now tied with the Lions for the second best record in the NFC. Brock Purdy did not need to do much. He was pretty efficient, 209 yards and touchdown, as well as an interception in the air. Christian McCaffrey took over 114 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, 5 receptions for 25 yards. Deebo Samuel had 7 receptions for 79 yards, as well as 15 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He was great. Uh, the defense had an interception and 6 sacks. Just a great performance by them. They also had a fumble recovery. This is just a really good San Francisco 49ers team. I don't think we really need to say much else here. Seattle is much more interesting because they, after a hot start to the season, have considerably cooled down. They are now 6-5. Technically, their playoff spot is at risk. There are a few teams that could potentially leapfrog them if things go wrong over the next couple weeks that are out of the playoffs right now, like the Packers. Geno Smith continues to struggle, 180 yards and an interception. Without star running back Kenneth Walker, the Seahawks weren't able to get much on the ground. Zach Charbonnet, the rookie, had 47 yards on 14 carries. Not much else of note here. The Seattle defense did have that interception. They also had a sack and a touchdown, but really they weren't able to generate anything against the 49ers, who are just a better team. It's going to be very interesting to see if Seattle is able to hang on here in the final stretch of the season. I would imagine they are going to be able to, just because I think they're a little bit more talented than these other wild card level teams in the NFC. But things could go wrong and the wheels could fall off. And in that case, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what they do in the offseason. Football fans got an extra treat this week as we had a Black Friday game between the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets, which Miami won pretty handily, 34-13. For the Jets, this game was pretty much the culmination of uh, everything that could possibly go wrong for them this season. Starting Tim Boyle at quarterback, the team struggled to do anything on the offensive side of the ball. He threw for 179 yards and touchdown, but he also had 2 very bad interceptions and routinely missed throws that he should not have. Brees Hall wasn't able to generate anything on the ground, only 25 yards on 7 carries. He did have 7 receptions, though. Garrett Wilson, 7 receptions for 44 yards and a touchdown. The Jets defense once again played admirably. 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, a touchdown on a pick six, but it wasn't enough. And really, that's just the story of the New York Jets this season. Their offense has not been able to do enough. Their defense, despite playing admirably, is not able to hold off these prolific offenses they're facing for 60 minutes. And that just leads to losses. And I expect those losses to continue into next week as well. The Miami Dolphins did what they had to. Raheem Mostert was great on the ground, 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jeff Wilson, 56 yards on the ground as well. Tyreek Hill continued his dominance, 102 yards and a touchdown through the air. Uh, People are starting to say that he could hit 2,000 yards this season, and I would not be surprised if he does. Uh, the defense as well, two interceptions, seven sacks, pick six. Just a great performance by the team all around. Interestingly, though, Tua did struggle a little bit in this game. He had two interceptions, but really was not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Miami won; they were expected to win, and they now go into the final stretch of the season, leading the division at 8-3. The Sunday slate of games kicked off with an NFC South showdown between the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, which saw Atlanta surprisingly take the win 24-15, moving them to first place in the division. Yes, you heard that right. Arthur Smith's Falcons are in first place in the NFC South. How? I don't know. And quite frankly, I don't think I want to. Quarterback Desmond Ritter threw for 168 yards, a touchdown, two interceptions on only 21 attempts. He also ran for 30 yards. Uh, I doubt he's going to be the starter past this year. He has not looked good. But as of right now, he is Atlanta's best chance of winning under center, so he will continue to start. It seems like the Falcons finally realized that they have a superstar in Bijan Robinson. He had 16 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown, three receptions on six targets for 32 yards and a touchdown. They're finally utilizing him, guys. And look, they're also utilizing Drake London, who had five receptions on seven targets for 91 yards. Now, if only they could start utilizing Kyle Pitts. On the defensive side, the Falcons had an interception, a sack, a fumble, and a touchdown. This defense actually has been playing pretty well for the most part this season, and I, for the most part, continue to expect them to do so. Now, if the offense is able to right the ship here, and if Arthur Smith decides to continue to utilize his star players, then I can see the Falcons winning the division here. But the track record, at least to me, indicates that that's not going to happen and that this team is going to go back to struggling over the next few weeks. New Orleans somehow was worse than Atlanta in this game. Derek Carr had 304 yards and an interception. He has not been playing well. The New Orleans defense, which was supposed to be really, really good, had two interceptions, no sacks, was not really able to generate much pressure. It's surprising. Really, the only thing that's been working for New Orleans is Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave. Alvin Kamara had 69 yards on the ground, four receptions for 50 yards. He's been dynamic this season, and it's really unfortunate that another prolific season from him is potentially going to go down the drain. Chris Olave, seven receptions for 114 yards. He is firmly back on track now after struggling earlier in the season. Unfortunately, though, he has a concussion, so he might miss next week. Something to monitor here. New Orleans should be running away with this division. They are the most talented team. And the fact that they aren't is really an indictment on the coaching. If New Orleans does not end up winning this division, I fully expect Dennis Allen to be out of a job come January. And even if they do win the division, if they are unable to go on a run, that might happen too. This team is just too talented. They have too much on this roster to be 5-6, and the fact that they are is just one big disappointment. Freed from the offensive shackles of Matt Canada, the Pittsburgh Steelers did something that they were unable to do throughout his entire tenure. Put up a 400-yard performance on offense. In fact, this offensive performance was so good for Pittsburgh that they had put up the most yards in a game that they have had since November of 2018. Another fun fact from this game. This is the first game that Pittsburgh has had this season where they have outgained their opponent on offense. That's insane. And as a result, it's no surprise that the Steelers moved to 7-4 in the season, beating the Cincinnati Bengals 16-10. Kenny Pickett was relatively efficient on the day, 24 of 33, 278 yards in the air. Uh, it's going to be interesting to see how he develops now that he is not being coached by Matt Canada on the offensive side of the ball. And Pittsburgh's going to finally get a fair evaluation of a guy who could potentially be their franchise quarterback. Najee Harris, 15 carries, 99 yards, and a touchdown. He was great. Jalen Warren, 13 carries, 49 yards on the ground, 3 receptions for 13 yards. Just a dynamic 1-2 punch in the backfield in Pittsburgh. Deontay Johnson, 4 receptions on 8 targets, 50 yards. George Pickens, 3 receptions on 5 targets for 58 yards. The breakout game, though, was for tight end Pat Freiermuth. He had 9 receptions for 120 yards. He went absolutely ballistic this week. And for a young player like that, you really want to see something, especially at the tight end position. So it's good to see him start to flourish a bit more. The Steelers defense also had an interception, 4 sacks, and was just thoroughly dominant. Pittsburgh's a good team. They're a well coached team. They have a lot of talent. And now that they have a more modern offensive scheme, they could surprise a lot of people and really put it together down the stretch. Cincinnati moves to 5-6. Their season's pretty much done. Jake Browning had a rough day at the office, 227 yards, a touchdown, and interception in the air. Joe Mixon was unable to get anything going on the ground. 16 yards on 8 carries. He did have 2 receptions for 44 yards. Didn't ultimately matter. Cincinnati just struggled. We expected them to, but I did not expect it to be this bad. This was a team that made the Super Bowl a couple years ago, made the AFC Championship last year. They should be performing a little bit better than what they are right now, even if they are missing their franchise quarterback. In particular, the defense should be performing a lot better. 2 sacks and a fumble, but really not much else. Cincinnati's looking towards 2024. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the offseason, particularly to address some of their issues along the offensive line and in the running game, as well as on the defense. Uh, but for now, I think we can effectively say that without Joe Burrow, their 2023 season seems lost. Fans of the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars were treated to a dynamic quarterback battle, which saw the 8-3 Jacksonville Jaguars prevail over the 6-5 Houston Texans, 24-21. Trevor Lawrence threw for 364 yards and a touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion. He ran for a touchdown as well. He did have an interception, but for the most part, it seems like his struggles earlier in the season are behind him now. Travis Etienne had 56 yards on the ground, 4 receptions for 30 yards. Calvin Ridley merged once again. He had 5 receptions for 89 yards and touchdown, as well as that 2-point conversion. Christian Kirk, 4 receptions for 89 yards. The Jacksonville defense, 4 sacks. Just a good game by the Jacksonville Jaguars against a good opponent and a nice quality win for them as they now take further control of the AFC South and look to position themselves for the playoffs. As for Houston, they can hang their hat on the fact that they were able to compete with a team that is now a half game back from the number 1 seed in the AFC. CJ Stroud, amazing performance, 304 yards, 2 touchdowns in the air, 47 yards and touchdown in the ground. He's just so good at football. Devin Singletary struggled on the ground, 6 carries, 18 yards, 6 receptions for 54, though he was prolific in the air. Damian Pierce in his return, 5 carries, 14 yards, reception for 4 yards. I expect his workload to continue to ramp up as he continues to get healthy. It's going to be very interesting to see how he performs in the later part of the season. Nico Collins, 7 receptions for 104 yards and a touchdown. He was great. Tank Dell, 5 receptions, 50 yards and a touchdown. Houston defense was not really able to get much, though. Only a single interception. They were not able to pressure Trevor Lawrence particularly effectively. And ultimately, Houston played well, but it wasn't enough for them. They are tied in terms of record with the Indianapolis Colts for the final AFC wild card berth. As of right now, if the season ended today, it would be Indianapolis as the 7th seed. But Houston should be excited. They have a bright future. They're competing this year, and this is just a fun team all around. Speaking of those Indianapolis Colts, they managed to eke out a 27-20 win over the 4-7 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They now move to 6-5 on the year and claim the seventh seed in the AFC. Gardner Minshew threw for 251 yards. He did have an interception, but he also ran for a touchdown on the ground. Michael Pittman, 10 receptions, 107 yards. The Colts defense, 6 sacks, an interception, and a fumble. Just a great performance by them. Unfortunately, though, for Indianapolis, the big story out of this is that Jonathan Taylor suffered a thumb injury. It was found on Monday. He's going to have surgery and he's going to be out a few weeks. And I don't expect Indianapolis to stay in the 7th seed. Buffalo's breathing down their necks. Houston's right there. Denver is right there too. Just the AFC is really competitive. But at this point, I think we can safely say that Indianapolis has a really good team. And come 2024, when rookie phenom Anthony Richardson comes back, they set up nicely to be competitive. Uh, Tampa Bay still has a great chance to win their division in the meanwhile. Baker Mayfield, 199 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception in the air. Shad White, he's been phenomenal. 100 yards on 15 carries, 2 receptions as well. Mike Evans, 6 receptions, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was the Tampa defense who really lost this game for the team, was not able to do much. An interception, 2 sacks, but outside of that, they weren't able to stop anything. In a week, NFC South, Tampa is still very much competitive. They're a game back from the division, and hypothetically, they could still take it here. But if they do, it's likely to be with an 8-9 or like a 9-8 record. Still, they are alive, and they could have a path forward to the playoffs. The New England Patriots fell to 2-9 on Sunday, missing a last-second field goal as the New York Giants, now 4-8, managed to eke out a 10-7 victory. Let's talk about the Giants here first. They're 4-8. Technically, they're 2 back from the NFC wild card. They could, if things go right, hypothetically make the playoffs. I doubt that's going to happen though, but crazier things have happened. Tommy DeVito was relatively efficient. He did not make any rash decisions. He was relatively efficient in spreading out the ball. 191 yards and a touchdown in the air. Saquon was not able to get much going against a good Patriots defense. 46 yards on the ground, single reception, 6 yards. It was Jalen Hyatt who surprised everybody. 5 receptions for 109 yards in the air. That Giants defense, of course, continues their impressive stretch of play. 3 interceptions and 2 sacks. Just a good team win by the Giants here. Let's talk about the Patriots now. Mac Jones is not good at being an NFL quarterback. He threw for 89 yards and 2 interceptions. This it's not acceptable. He's really not doing anything right now. He's late on his throws. He's consistently throwing the ball behind his receivers. He's placing the ball low as well. He's not reading the field correctly. So it really didn't surprise me when Belichick pulled him at halftime and put in Bailey Zappi, who now projects to start this week. Zappi, of course, was not great either. Threw for 54 yards and an interception. It's really unfortunate too because Ramondre Stevenson had an excellent game on the ground, 98 yards and a touchdown. Patriots defense, of course, 6 sacks. No matter how bad a Belichick team might be, you always know the defense is going to be relatively decent, and the run game is always going to be there. So just see an effort like that wasted because the quarterbacks cannot do their job properly is really unfortunate. It's always been a question whether or not Belichick was going to survive the season in New England. And at this point, I unfortunately think the team is going to move in a different direction. It's an unfortunate end to a legendary career. I don't necessarily think Bill deserves it. I think he deserves to retire on his own terms, but that's why the NFL is the not for long league. Then again, who knows? Perhaps he'll be allowed to draft the successor to Mac Jones in New England. Uh, Either way, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here in Foxborough in the next year. And it's going to be more interesting, I think, to see who's leading the team in 2024. As bad as this season has been for the Patriots, it's been that much worse for the Carolina Panthers. Frank Reich era in Carolina ended this Sunday as the Tennessee Titans beat them 17 to 10, moving to 4-7 on the season. The Panthers, now 1-10, have fired their head coach after 11 games. And really, I think this is just a culmination of everything that's been going on down in Carolina this season. Uh, More concerning, though, is that Bryce Young has reportedly lost the locker room already. Uh, Ownership has had to come out and justify taking him with the number one pick. It's really just a mess here. And honestly, I don't know how things are going to get better. Carolina's ownership now has a reputation of being meddling. The team doesn't have any draft capital, and there aren't a lot of top free agents in the 2024 class. Uh, Really, the future does not look bright here for the Panthers at all. And even if Bryce Young does manage to turn things around, it's not like they're going to have a ton of room to surround him with talent. Uh, as bad as 2023 is, it might actually be worse for them next year, which is really, really, really unfortunate. For the Tennessee Titans, rookie quarterback Will Levis did not really do a lot here. 185 yards in the air. Derrick Henry, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. The defense, 4 sacks. Uh, did not really allow anything to Carolina. They also had a fumble, but that was to be expected. The Titans were expected to win. Carolina's a really bad team, and Tennessee had not won, there would be a lot more questions in Nashville than there already are. The Los Angeles Rams kicked off our afternoon slate of games, beating up on the Arizona Cardinals 37 to 14. The Rams are now 5-6 on the season. They are still very much alive in the NFC playoff race, given that the 7th seed is now 6-6. Matthew Stafford, great game. 229 yards, 4 touchdowns in the air. He did have an interception, but that didn't really matter. Kyron Williams, 143 yards on the ground, 6 receptions, 61 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. Royce Freeman, 77 yards and touchdown on the ground as well. Really just LA ran all over the Cardinals. Now they are game back from the playoffs, as I mentioned before. Still very much alive here, and given their talent, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, they could be a threat down the line. And perhaps if things shake out right, end up in the playoffs come January. For Arizona, they fall to 2-10 on the season. Kyler Murray had another statistically impressive game, 256 yards, a touchdown. Also ran in for a touchdown as well. Uh, Fortunately, on the ground, Arizona wasn't able to get much done. James Conner, 27 yards on the ground. Marquise Brown, after a couple weeks of struggles, seems to have found his groove. 6 receptions, 88 yards. Trey McBride continues to impress. 7 receptions, 60 yards. The defense only had a single interception, was not able to generate any pressure. Still, no one really expected Arizona to win this game. So the fact that they were able to at least somewhat keep up for a little bit is impressive nonetheless. And it just is a testament to the culture that is continuing to be built in Phoenix. And perhaps the most shocking game of the week, the Cleveland Browns fell to 7-4, losing to the now 6-5 Denver Broncos 29-12. Dorian Thompson Robinson is in concussion protocol now. suffered a pretty bad hit in this game. He's probably going to not play this week, which is really bad for Cleveland. They have a very important matchup now against the Los Angeles Rams, who are also competing for the playoffs. It seems like Joe Flacco is now going to get the nod here. Cleveland also might have lost Myles Garrett in this game, and their defense, which has been a top five unit all year long, might suffer because of it. Still, Cleveland is a very talented team, and I expect them to bounce back and be competitive next week, no matter who is at quarterback and no matter if Myles Garrett is starting for them at defensive end. However, it should be noted going forward that Cleveland does not have a lot of wiggle room here in terms of games that they can lose. Not that they would want to lose any anyways, but they have lost a few critical games here, including to this one at Denver, that could hurt them in the long run in the playoff picture. Speaking of Denver, they are now tied for the seventh seed, which is perhaps the most shocking thing I've said this year. This is a team that, again, has lost a game where their opponent put up 70 points. And the fact that they were able to turn their season around from that is remarkable. It's hard to believe, but since that game, Denver has been 6-2, and their defense has really tightened up as of late. 4 sacks and a safety in this game, not to mention 3 fumbles. Just hats off to Denver. No one expected them to be here at this point in the season. They looked completely lost and humiliated at the beginning of the season. So the fact that they were able to turn it around, just kudos to them. The Kansas City Chiefs beat up on the Vegas Raiders as everyone expected. They had a 31-17 victory that did not look as close as the score indicated. Patrick Mahomes, 298 yards, 2 touchdowns in the air. Isaiah Pacheco, 55 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground to go along with 5 receptions for 34 yards. Rice broke out 8 receptions, 107 yards and a touchdown. He's been really good all season for them. He just has not been getting the looks. So the fact that now Patrick Mahomes trusts him and is starting to get him the ball a lot more is really good for this Kansas City offense. Travis Kelce, 6 receptions, 91 yards. He's the best tight end in football. Kansas City defense, though, which has been a top 5 unit this season, has not been able to do much. They had single sack in this game, but nothing else. It's surprising. See, but hey, when the defense can't win, it seems like the offense is able to pick up the slack. Kansas City right now is probably the best team in the AFC. I know Baltimore's the number 1 seed, but it's Kansas City, and as long as they have Patrick Mahomes, let's face it, they're going to be competing for the Super Bowl. For the Raiders, rookie quarterback Aiden O'Connell had an okay game, 248 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs, 110 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He was great. Jacoby Myers, 6 receptions, 79 yards and a touchdown. Devontae, 5 for 73. Raiders defense was not able to stop Patrick Mahomes, though. That's why they lost this game. Only had a single sack. The Raiders are an interesting team in the sense that they can play spoiler. They've been competitive since Josh McDaniels left. But I think at this point in the season, given how competitive the AFC is, they are a long shot to make the playoffs. It's every week, man, with the Philadelphia Eagles. Somehow they give me a new heart attack. This week's heart attack was caused by a game that saw the Buffalo Bills take them to overtime. And yes, the Eagles did eventually win 37-34, but still, quite a stressful experience if I do say so myself. Jalen Hurts is the MVP leader, I think, right now. 200 yards, 3 touchdowns in the air. He did have an interception, but he also had 65 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He's just phenomenal. He's playing at such a high level. Really, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I think he is going to end up winning the MVP, which is very, very exciting. We have not had an MVP in Philadelphia in quite some time. Well, I mean, an NFL MVP, anyways. DeAndre Swift, 80 yards on the ground. Devonta Smith, 106 yards, touchdown on 7 receptions. AJ Brown, 5 receptions, 37 yards and a touchdown. Uh, Philadelphia defense, an interception, a sack, and a critical blocked field goal. Uh, Defense was not great, but they ended up doing just enough. Ultimately, though, the Eagles won because of the brilliance of Jalen Hurts, which is why they are 10-1 and could potentially clinch a playoff spot next week. Buffalo, meanwhile, gave it their all. Josh Allen was also playing at an MVP level, 339 yards, 2 touchdowns in the air to go along with the interception, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He's just really good, and it's really unfortunate that this high level season from him is for a 6-6 team that might miss the playoffs. James Cook, 43 yards on the ground, 6 receptions for 57 yards in the air, though. He's a pretty good young running back, and I think he's going to be a big part of Buffalo's future. Gabe Davis, 6 receptions, 105 yards and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs, 6 receptions, 74 yards and a touchdown. Buffalo defense, an interception, 2 sacks. Uh, the Buffalo just was not good enough to beat Philadelphia at the end of the day. And even though they managed to get it to overtime, they even kicked a field goal on their drive. It just wasn't enough. And at this point, you have to really question whether or not Sean McDermott is going to last the season, especially if Buffalo does end up missing the playoffs. I really cannot see how Brandon Staley survives the season at this point after the 20-10 loss Chargers suffered on Sunday Night Football to the Ravens. Uh, Justin Herbert, 217 yards touchdown and an interception. Was not his best game, especially against a really good Baltimore team. But for the most part, he's been great this season, and it's really a shame that Los Angeles has not been able to capitalize on that. Austin Eckler, 32 yards on the ground, 32 yards in the air. Keenan Allen, 14 receptions, 106 yards. He's on pace for a historic season. Again, really unfortunate the team is not able to capitalize on that. The defense, 2 sacks. Not a great performance from them once again. But that's the story of the 2023 Chargers. Defense has been disappointing. And considering that Brandon Staley was hired for his defense, that's pretty bad. For Baltimore, they moved to 9-3. They are the #1 seed in the AFC right now, going into their bye week. Lamar Jackson, 177 yards and touchdown in the air, 39 on the ground. He did enough here. Keaton Mitchell, 64 yards on the ground, 2 receptions, 25 yards. It's really exciting to see him get more involved in this Baltimore offense as the season goes on. Zay Flowers, 37-yard rushing touchdown to go along with 5 receptions for 25 yards and a touchdown in the air. Isaiah Likely filling in for Mark Andrews had 4 receptions for 40 yards. And the Ravens defense had an interception, 3 sacks. They also had 3 fumble recoveries. This Ravens defense is a top 5 unit. It's just the engine that makes this team go. And going into the bye, it's probably the primary reason why they are the #1 seed at this point. Given that Cleveland is hurting, Pittsburgh is still relatively inconsistent, and Cincinnati is pretty much done with Joe Burrow out. At this point, I think it's safe to say that Baltimore is probably going to win the AFC North and potentially, if things continue to go right for them, host a playoff game in the divisional round as the #1 seed. Monday Night Football wrapped up the week with a 12-10 Chicago Bears victory over the division rival Minnesota Vikings. The Bears won without scoring a single touchdown in this game. This is the first time a team has done this season. Justin Fields was all right in this game. 27 out of 37 for 217 yards in the air. 12 carries, 59 yards on the ground. Chicago running backs weren't really able to get anything going here. But DJ Moore, 11 receptions for 114 yards. Cole Kmet, 7 receptions, 43 yards. The defense, 4 interceptions, 2 sacks. Uh, Really, this was just a great performance by the Chicago defense to keep them in this game. Their offense was not able to get into the end zone. And the fact that they won only taking field goals is a testament to how good that unit played. Minnesota Vikings, meanwhile, fall to 6-6. Josh Dobbs, the Cinderella story looks like it's ending here. 185 yards and a touchdown, but 4 costly interceptions. Alexander Madison, 52 yards on the ground. Uh, Jordan Addison, 6 receptions, 39 yards. TJ Hawkinson, of course, was great, 5 receptions, 50 yards and a touchdown. Minnesota defense, 3 sacks, as well as 2 fumble recoveries. A lot of fumbles this week in the NFL. But it ultimately was not enough. The offense was not able to generate anything. And now at 6-6, Minnesota is once again at risk to lose their playoff spot to potentially the Packers or the Rams if they are unable to get things back on track. Thank you so much for watching this week's NFL breakdown from the Sports Ball Network. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like. If you like what we do on the channel, subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.